Before you judge me, let me tell you what happened. For 30 years, I packed school lunches I couldn't afford to eat myself, skipping my own meals to ensure my daughter had everything she needed. I quietly and gladly paid for half of that grand wedding. But when I sat down at her glittering, opulent reception, I was served a plate of tinned dog food. I heard the snickering. I heard her new mother-in-law, Beatrice, whisper, "She's used to scraps, anyway." I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I simply stood up, walked out, and made a phone call. They thought I was just a poor old woman. What they didn't know was that the very land their grand future depended on was still in my name. And I was about to teach them the true price of cruelty. The navy blue dress I chose for Charlotte's wedding came from an Oxfam shop in Sheffield 3 years ago. It had cost me all of £4, and I'd kept it wrapped in tissue paper at the back of my wardrobe, waiting for an occasion special enough to justify even that small extravagance. I never imagined that occasion would be the day my only child would marry into a dynasty and treat me like a stray cat she'd found on her doorstep. As the taxi wound its way through the honey-colored stone villages of the Cotswolds, I watched the sprawling manor houses pass by like ancient, sleeping beasts. Their mullioned windows glinted under the weak April sun, and the air, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming wisteria, felt heavy with old money and secrets. This part of the country had always struck me as beautiful, but unforgiving to those who didn't belong to its exclusive club. The driver, a kind man with a weathered face, asked if this was the place, pulling up before the imposing gates of Pemberton Manor. The estate stretched for what looked like 100 acres, a perfect tapestry of manicured lawns and ancient oak trees that looked as if they'd been plucked from a period drama. "Yes, thank you." My voice sounded firmer than the trembling I felt inside. I paid the fare, adding a generous tip. 40 years of working as a dinner lady in a comprehensive school had taught me the value of kindness to those who work hard for little reward. The driver offered a genuine smile that settled my nerves for a moment as he helped me out. The main entrance was a flurry of activity. Sleek German cars purred up the gravel drive, disgorging elegant couples. The women wore fascinators that looked like exotic, endangered birds, and dresses that likely cost more than my last 3 months' wages. The men, uniformly handsome in their tailored morning suits, looked like they belonged to a secret society I'd never be invited to join. I stood on the edge of the drive, clutching my small clutch bag, until a wedding planner with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes descended upon me. "Mrs. Monroe?"
I'm Tabitha.
"Beatrice asked me to escort you to your seat." She didn't ask how I was, or comment on the journey. She simply steered me down a side path, away from the grand entrance, as if I were a slightly embarrassing parcel that needed to be delivered through the tradesman's entrance. The back garden had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. An archway heavy with white roses and eucalyptus framed the spot where Charlotte and Rupert would exchange their vows. Gilt chairs were arranged in perfect rows, tied with silk ribbons that fluttered in the gentle breeze. It was all exquisite, elegant, and breathtakingly expensive. I remembered the nights I'd spent working extra cleaning shifts at the local hospital, after my day at the school, to help pay for Charlotte's private tutoring. She never knew. I never told her the cost. Tabitha led me to the very last row, to a single chair tucked behind a large stone pillar that partially obscured the view of the altar. It wasn't a seat of honor for the mother of the bride. It was a place to be present but unseen, included but marginalized. "You'll be comfortable here," she said, though we both knew comfort wasn't the point. I sat, placing my clutch on my lap. Inside was a handkerchief my own mother had embroidered, a faded photo of my late husband, Arthur, and a small notebook where I jotted down the words I wanted to say to Charlotte. Words about how much I loved her, how proud I was, how I hoped we could become closer now she was starting this new chapter. The front rows began to fill. I recognized faces from the society pages Charlotte had started appearing in. Rupert's business partners, friends from the polo club, the extended Pembroke clan. Not a single person looked my way. To them, I was part of the furniture. Beatrice Pembroke, the groom's mother, made her entrance like a queen surveying her court. Her champagne-colored dress probably cost more than my car, and the diamonds at her throat caught the light like tiny, cold stars. She moved with the unshakable confidence of a woman who had never once questioned her place in the world. When her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, her polite smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something that looked like disdain before her composure was restored. The music began, a string quartet playing something classical and serene. The bridesmaids, all impossibly young and beautiful in lavender silk, glided down the aisle. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Charlotte appeared on the arm of her father-in-law-to-be, radiant in a vintage lace gown that had belonged to the Pembroke matriarch. My heart swelled with a painful mix of pride and sorrow. She looked magnificent, every inch the princess she'd always dreamed of being. But as her eyes scanned the congregation, they passed over me, transparent. There was no nod of acknowledgement, no subtle gesture of thanks for being there. It was as if the 35 years I had raised her, loved her, and sacrificed for her had been erased from her memory. The ceremony was beautiful but felt hollow, the vows of eternal love sounding rehearsed. When the vicar asked if anyone had an objection, for one absurd moment, I thought about standing up. Not to object, but to simply remind them that I existed. That I had raised this extraordinary woman almost single-handedly, that my love had been the one constant in her life. But I remained seated, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and watched as my daughter officially became a Pembroke. The reception moved to a vast, elegant marquee, draped in fairy lights and filled with floral centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent. Guests mingled with glasses of champagne, laughing and sharing stories that contained no memory of me. I was assigned to a table in the furthest corner, along with the nanny and a distant, slightly drunk cousin of the groom. During the dinner service, I watched Charlotte and Rupert at the head table, surrounded by their laughing, celebrating friends and family. Beatrice was telling a charming anecdote about Rupert's childhood, while no one mentioned a single thing about Charlotte's. It was as if her life had only begun the day she met the Pembrokes. Then my plate arrived. The presentation was artistic. A protein shaped into an elegant pâté, accompanied by geometrically cut vegetables and a glistening sauce. It looked sophisticated, the kind of dish you'd expect at a high-society wedding in the Cotswolds. But the smell was unsettlingly familiar. I took a small, cautious bite. My stomach lurched. The taste was unmistakable. Tinned dog food. A premium, organic brand, no doubt, to mask the insult with a veneer of class, but dog food nonetheless. The grainy texture, the metallic aftertaste, the way it crumbled in my mouth. It all reminded me of feeding Buster, my beloved golden retriever who had passed away last year. I glanced around my table. The others were eating something different, a delicate-looking piece of salmon. Only I had received this special delicacy. I heard a stifled giggle from the head table. Beatrice was whispering something to a woman beside her, and they both glanced in my direction before breaking into small, cruel laughs. Then I heard the words that would be seared into my memory forever. She's used to scraps, anyway. The voice was Beatrice's, but the laughter that followed included a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat. I turned my head slightly and saw Charlotte, my Charlotte, covering her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking with suppressed mirth. My own daughter, the little girl I had rocked through nightmares, whose tears I had wiped away when children teased her for her worn-out shoes, was laughing at my public humiliation. The fork grew heavy in my hand. The noise of the reception faded to a distant buzz. For a moment, the world shrank to that single plate in front of me and the gut-wrenching realization that my daughter had either orchestrated this or, at the very least, allowed it. All the sacrifices, the double shifts, the skipped meals, all for this moment. To be fed like an animal at my own daughter's wedding, while she laughed. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the plate. I didn't shed a single tear, though it felt as if my heart was splintering into 1,000 sharp pieces inside my chest. Instead, I placed my fork down neatly beside the plate. I folded my linen napkin and laid it over the food. I rose with the quiet grace I had perfected over decades of being invisible and walked towards the exit. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. No one even noticed that the mother of the bride was leaving the reception before the speeches, before the cake, before the bouquet toss. I walked down the side path to the main road, where I called a taxi from my old mobile phone. While I waited, the silence of my small terraced house in Sheffield wrapped around me like a familiar, threadbare blanket as I closed the front door. My low-heeled shoes, the most sensible I owned, echoed on the worn laminate flooring of the hallway. I walked past the gallery of photographs that documented a life that now felt like a fiction. Charlotte at 5, a gap-toothed grin in the school uniform I'd sewn myself. Charlotte graduating from university, beaming in her cap and gown, a future I had funded with aching bones and sleepless nights. The day she met Rupert, a dazzling smile on her face that I had, at the time, mistaken for genuine happiness. Now, every framed moment seemed like a gilded lie. I made my way to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed Arthur and I had shared for the brief, beautiful years of our marriage. His last words to me before the crash that stole him away echoed in my memory, as they so often did. Look after our girl, Elaine. She's going to be something special one day. What would he say now, if he could see her laughing as they fed me like an animal? With hands that trembled only slightly, I unzipped the navy dress. It slid from my shoulders, and I felt the cool air on my skin, a sensation I hadn't truly registered in years. It was as if I was shedding not just a garment, but a role I had played for too long. I hung it carefully back in the wardrobe. It may have been from Oxfam, but it had been my armor for a day I had so looked forward to. I pulled on my old, soft cotton nightgown, the one I'd worn through countless nights watching over a feverish Charlotte, or waiting up for her to come home from teenage parties. Then, I walked to the heavy oak chest of drawers I'd inherited from my mother. In the bottom drawer, tucked behind photo albums and a bundle of Arthur's love letters tied with a faded ribbon, was the gray metal box I hadn't opened in years. Inside, I kept the most important documents of my life: my will, a modest insurance policy, and the deeds to the coastal property I had inherited from my parents when I was 25. The property, a small cove down in Cornwall, had been my family's summer sanctuary for 3 generations. 5 acres of rugged, sea-battered coastline with a modest but sturdy cottage my grandfather had built with his own hands in the 1950s. When my parents died in a car accident 15 years ago, the deeds passed directly to me. They had structured it that way to ensure I always had something of my own, a financial safety net. I had never told Charlotte the true value of that land. In recent years, with the explosion of luxury tourism in Cornwall, those 5 acres were easily worth millions. To her, it was just Gran and Granddad's old shack, a place we sometimes went for weekends when she was little, before she decided such rustic escapes were beneath her. I pulled out the thick vellum paper and smoothed it out. My name, Elaine Monroe, was printed clearly as the sole owner. Charlotte was listed as the beneficiary in my current will, of course. I had always assumed that one day, the land would be hers, giving her the financial security I never had. But after tonight, after her laughter had echoed in my ears, something fundamental had shifted that I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. While it boiled, I pulled out my old address book and looked for a number I hadn't dialed in a decade. Leo Marshall. He had been one of the brightest boys at the comprehensive school where I worked. A shy, studious lad, the son of a steelworker, who dreamed of being a lawyer. I used to let him stay late in the canteen, giving him extra sandwiches and cups of tea while he did his homework, because I saw a spark of fierce determination in him that reminded me of myself. Leo had graduated with top marks, won a scholarship to Cambridge, and now had his own successful law firm in the city, specializing in property and estate planning. He sent me a Christmas card every year with a picture of his wife and 2 children, always with a personal note thanking me for believing in him. I glanced at the clock. 10:30 at night. Too late to call his office, but I remembered he'd scribbled his personal number on the last card. Just in case you ever need anything. Elaine. My fingers were steady as I dialed. I had made a decision. Leo, it's Elaine Monroe. I'm so sorry to call this late. His voice, when he answered, was immediately warm, cutting through the formal lawyerly tone. Elaine. Not at all. Lovely to hear from you. The kids are finally asleep. Is everything all right? I'm fine, Leo, I am. But I need to talk to you about some legal matters. Would you have time to see me this week? Of course, he said, without a moment's hesitation. Is it urgent? I can see you tomorrow morning if you need. His immediate kindness was a balm on my raw nerves. It's not an emergency, but it is important. How about Tuesday morning? Perfect. My office at 10? You're sure you're okay? Elaine? You sound different. He had always been perceptive, that boy. I've had a rather enlightening evening, Leo. I'll tell you all about it on Tuesday. After we hung up, I made a cup of strong tea and sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Charlotte with her fractions, where we'd shared countless breakfasts before school. I took out a notepad and started a list. 1. Review my will with Leo. 2. Explore options for the Cornish property. 3. Organize my other financial papers. As I wrote, my eyes fell on the photo of Arthur I kept on the windowsill. It was from our first anniversary, the two of us grinning on the beach at Kestrel's Cove, the cottage visible in the background. His arm was around my shoulders, and I wore an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy. Would you be proud that I didn't cry? I whispered to the photograph. Would you be proud that I held my head high? There was no answer, of course, but in my heart, I felt that he would be. Arthur always said I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. You've got a core of Sheffield steel in you, love, he used to say. You just have to remember it's there. Tonight, I had rediscovered it. I learned later, weeks later, from a source I never would have expected, what was happening at that very moment 40 miles away in the Cotswolds. As I was rediscovering my steel, my daughter and her new family were planning how to strip me of everything I had left. The conversation, I was told, had started over breakfast the morning after the wedding, around a grand mahogany table that had been in the Pembroke family for generations. Now that you're officially a Pembroke, Beatrice had begun, spreading artisanal marmalade on a warm croissant, we need to discuss family assets. Rupert tells me about your mother's coastal property. Charlotte's eyes had apparently lit up. She had been dreaming of that land for months, imagining the possibilities. It's perfect for what we have in mind, she'd said. 5 prime acres, right on the beach. We could build the most incredible luxury resort. Rupert had nodded enthusiastically. I've run the numbers. With the right development, we're talking a 300% return on investment. Luxury cabins, an event space, a spa. The demand for that sort of thing in Cornwall is insatiable. And your mother is amenable to this? Beatrice had asked, though her tone suggested my opinion was a mere formality. Charlotte had waved a dismissive hand. Oh, she never does anything with it anyway. Just sits there and stares at the ocean. It's a total waste of potential income. Besides, Rupert had added, after last night, it's clear she needs to understand her old lifestyle isn't compatible with our new family situation. It will be for the best if we can get her settled somewhere, more suitable, and let us handle the important assets. Beatrice had smiled with approval. How very thoughtful of you, darling. They spent the next hour discussing detailed plans. Rupert had his laptop out, showing them images of similar developments in Salcombe and Padstow. He talked about architects he knew, contractors, interior designers. We'll call it the Pembroke Cove, Charlotte had suggested, her eyes gleaming with greed. It has a certain ring to it, don't you think? And what if she doesn't want to cooperate? Charlotte had asked, though her tone suggested she considered the possibility remote. Rupert had laughed, a short, arrogant bark. Seriously? We're talking about a woman who was a dinner lady for 40 years. She doesn't have the financial sophistication to understand what's at stake, and she certainly doesn't have the resources to fight us. The irony, of course, was that the only reason I had those resources was because I'd worked as a dinner lady for 40 years. They decided their timeline. Rupert would contact their solicitor and a surveyor that day. By the end of the week, they would pay me a family visit to discuss the future. It will be perfect, Charlotte had said, stretching like a satisfied cat. To new beginnings, Beatrice had toasted with her coffee cup. And to getting rid of unnecessary baggage, Rupert had added with a cruel smirk. Meanwhile, I was parking my old but reliable Ford Fiesta outside the smart, modern office building where Leo Marshall had his practice. I stepped out of the car, carrying the gray metal box and a resolve that had been hardening since the moment I tasted that dog food. The receptionist greeted me warmly and showed me into Leo's office. When he stood up to shake my hand, I saw the same respect in his eyes that I'd seen when he was a boy. To him, I wasn't baggage. I was the person who— "This is more than just estate planning," Leo said after I'd finished my story, his fingers drumming a quiet, angry rhythm on the polished surface of his desk. "This is about protecting your dignity, Elaine, and ensuring your legacy reflects your values, not their greed." His words resonated deep within me. For 40 years, my values had been lived quietly. Work hard, be kind, sacrifice for the one you love. I had never considered that my legacy could be an active extension of those values, a final, defiant statement of who I truly was. "What do you suggest?" I asked, a flutter of nervous anticipation in my chest. Leo leaned back, his expression serious but kind. "First, we draft a new will, one that reflects your true intentions. Second, if you want to ensure the Cornish property is used in a way that honors your family, we have several options." He explained the legal intricacies of creating a charitable trust, the tax advantages, the ways to structure it so it would be utterly ironclad, completely irrevocable. As he spoke, my mind drifted not to legal clauses, but to the memory of my old dog, Buster. The feel of his soft head under my hand, his unconditional love, and the cruel, twisted irony of the dog food on that fine china plate. The Pembrokes had used it as a weapon of humiliation, a symbol of what they thought I was worth. What if I turned their weapon into a shield? What if I took their symbol of scorn and transformed it into one of compassion? "Leo," I said, interrupting him gently, "I have an idea. I want to donate the land. I want it to become a sanctuary for old and unwanted animals, especially dogs. A place where creatures who have been cast aside can live out their days in comfort and dignity." For a moment, Leo was silent, his professional mask slipping to reveal the kind-hearted boy I remembered. He just stared at me, then a slow, wide smile spread across his face. "That, Elaine, is the most perfect, poetic justice I have ever heard." The following Wednesday, I drove down to Cornwall. The journey was a pilgrimage. As the motorways gave way to winding roads and then to narrow, hedge-rowed lanes, I felt the tension of the city seep out of me. The air grew soft and salty. This was a homecoming. The property looked exactly as I remembered. The weathered gray cottage stood stoically against the Atlantic winds, nestled between gorse-covered cliffs. This wasn't the blank canvas for a luxury resort that Charlotte and Rupert saw. This was a sanctuary, a place where 3 generations of my family had found peace. I parked the car and walked the familiar sandy path down to the cove. The rhythmic crash of the waves was an immediate balm, the soundtrack to my happiest memories. This was where Arthur had proposed, his voice almost lost in the wind. This was where I had brought a tiny Charlotte to build sandcastles and hunt for treasure in rock pools. And this was where I had come to grieve after Arthur's funeral, finding the strength to carry on in the endless, eternal rhythm of the tide. That I sat on the old wooden bench my father had built, its surface silvery and smooth from decades of sun and sea spray. It was then that I thought of Buster again. During his last few months, when his old joints were stiff with arthritis, I would bring him here. He would walk slowly at the water's edge, letting the cool sea foam wash over his paws. He had been my one constant, loyal companion as Charlotte drifted further and further away into her new, glittering world. In that moment, sitting on that bench, my decision solidified from a clever idea into a profound calling. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Leo had given me for a local animal rescue. "Second Chances, Sarah speaking." The voice was warm but no nonsense. "My name is Elaine Monroe," I said. "Leo Marshall gave me your number. I'd like to discuss a potential donation." An hour later, Sarah arrived in a battered but reliable-looking Land Rover with the Second Chances logo on the side. She was a woman in her 50s, with practical, graying hair tied back and kind, intelligent eyes that had seen their fair share of both cruelty and hope. "It's beautiful," she said simply, as we walked the perimeter of the property. "Rescue dogs, especially the ones who've been mistreated, they need a place like this to heal." I explained my vision. A haven specifically for older dogs, the ones with medical needs, the ones often overlooked in shelters. I wanted it to be a place of dignity for creatures discarded by a society that only values the young and the perfect. We could build low-impact, sustainable kennels that blend in with the landscape, Sarah mused, her eyes already mapping out the possibilities. Secure exercise areas, a small hydrotherapy pool using the seawater, quiet recovery rooms. As she spoke, I could see it all. Old dogs sunning themselves on the grass, volunteers gently stroking a nervous new arrival, the quiet peace of a place dedicated to simple kindness. There's just one condition, I said finally. I'd like it to be named the Buster Sanctuary, in honor of my dog. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. It would be an honor, Elaine. That Friday evening, back in my quiet house in Sheffield, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but when I answered, I heard a young, hesitant voice. Auntie Elaine? It's Talia. Talia was Charlotte's cousin, my late sister's granddaughter. She was 19, studying history at university in York, and had always been my favorite of the extended family. A thoughtful, sensitive soul who seemed to have inherited a decency that was lacking in the others. Talia, darling, how are you? I'm really upset, Auntie Elaine. I heard about what happened at the wedding. My mom told me, and, honestly, I'm ashamed of our family. Her voice cracked, and I could hear genuine sorrow. Don't you worry about it, love. No, it's not right. None of it is. And I heard them. I was at the Pembrokes house yesterday helping clear some things up, and I heard them talking. They're planning to build a resort on your land in Cornwall. They said they were going to persuade you to sign it over for your own good. It was disgusting. My heart, which had felt so calm in Cornwall, began to beat a little faster. Thank you for telling me, Talia. But please, don't get yourself into trouble over this. Auntie Elaine, her voice firmed with a resolve that reminded me of my own. You've always been more family to me than any of them. If there's anything I can do to help, her words were a lifeline. Here was someone from the next generation who could see the truth. In fact, there is something, I said, an idea forming. Would you like to have lunch with me tomorrow? There are a few things I'd like to discuss. The next morning, before meeting Talia, I went to Leo's office to sign the final, irrevocable documents. My new will left a significant portion of my savings to Talia, specifically for her education and future. The rest, along with the deeds to the Cornish property, were now officially signed over to the Buster Sanctuary Charitable Trust. Are you sure about this, Elaine? Leo asked one last time, the pen hovering over the page. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied, and it was the absolute truth. As my signature flowed across the paper, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was writing the ending, and it was going to be a beautiful one. Lunch with Talia at a quiet little cafe near the university was like finding a spring of fresh water in the emotional desert my family life had become. We sat by a window, the weak Yorkshire sun casting a pale glow on the table between us. Talia, a thoughtful girl with her grandmother's kind eyes, picked at a vegan sandwich while I had my usual, a simple bowl of tomato soup. Auntie Elaine, she began, her gaze direct, I need to apologize. On behalf of our entire family, for what they did. You don't have to apologize for other people's actions, my dear. Yes, I do, she insisted, her youthful face set with a fierce conviction that moved me. Because someone in our family needs to say it. They were wrong. Utterly, unforgivably wrong. I told her then about my recent decisions. About the sanctuary, about my new will. I watched her expressions shift from surprise to a dawning understanding, and finally, to a look of profound pride. That's perfect, she said, her voice soft. It's exactly what Buster would have wanted. And it's exactly what you deserve, for your legacy to be about who you really are. After lunch, as we walked back towards my car, Talia paused and looked at the photographs on the wall of my small living room. All these pictures of Charlotte, she murmured. Her graduation, her school prizes, her birthdays. Is there a single picture of you being celebrated? The question stopped me in my tracks. I scanned the walls of my own home and realized, with a jolt, that she was right. 40 years of my life, documented only through the achievements of my daughter. As if my own existence was only valid as a reflection of hers. I never thought of that, I admitted, the truth of it landing with a quiet thud. That's the whole problem, isn't it? Talia said gently. You became invisible, even to yourself. That evening, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Monroe? My name is Janet from the Yorkshire Post. We're doing a piece on local philanthropy, and we heard about your incredibly generous donation to a new animal sanctuary in Cornwall. Would you have a moment to talk? My stomach clenched. I hadn't expected the news to travel so quickly. How did you find out? Second Chances put out a press release this morning, she explained cheerfully. 5 acres of prime coastal land for the Buster Sanctuary. It's a wonderful story. Could you tell me a little about what motivated you? With my heart hammering against my ribs, I gave her a brief, carefully worded interview. I focused on my love for rescue animals and the memory of Buster, keeping my tone positive, avoiding any mention of family drama. But I knew that once that article was published, the Pembrokes would find out that their grand plans had been reduced to dust. I didn't have to wait long. The article appeared online the next morning, under the headline, Sheffield Dinner Lady's £1 million gift to homeless hounds. It included a stunning photograph of Kestrel's Cove and glowing quotes from Sarah about the plans for the sanctuary. My phone began to ring at 8:30 a.m. It was Charlotte. I let it go to voicemail, then again, and again. On the 4th call, I decided to answer. Mom. Her voice was tight, a forced, brittle calm. We need to talk. Now. Good morning, Charlotte. How are you and Rupert? Don't you dare start with the fake pleasantries. What is this I'm reading about you giving away the Cornish property? It has to be a mistake. There's no mistake, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. I've donated the land to the Buster Sanctuary. It's going to be a beautiful place for rescue dogs. There was a long, stunned silence. Then, you can't do that. That property is for the family. It's my property, Charlotte. It has always been my property. And I can do with it as I see fit. But, we had plans for it. What sort of plans? Another silence. She was clearly realizing that admitting they'd been planning to seize my assets without my knowledge wasn't a good look. Plans to develop it. To secure the family's financial future. And when, exactly, were you planning to discuss these plans with me? We were going to talk to you this week, in fact. After you'd already contacted solicitors and surveyors? This time, the silence was much, much longer. Finally, how did you know that? I have my sources. Just as you have yours for dog food. That was just a joke. It was nothing personal. Feeding your own mother dog food at your wedding wasn't personal? Allowing your new family to publicly humiliate me wasn't personal? Mom, you're overreacting. You're being dramatic. No, Charlotte. For the first time in my life, I'm being honest. And the truth is, you treated me in a way that can never be undone. And now you're angry because you can't profit from it. You can't just give away millions of pounds. And there it is, I said quietly. That's all it's ever about for you. Isn't it? The money. That's not true. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was? When did you last ask me to lunch without wanting something? When did you last tell me you loved me without it being an automatic response to me saying it first? Silence. You can't answer because you don't remember. And neither do I. Mom, can we please just fix this? No, I said, and the word felt solid, final. We can't. Some things can't be fixed, Charlotte. Some things just reveal who people really are. I ended the call. For the next few hours, the phone rang incessantly. Charlotte called 12 more times. Rupert called 6. Even Beatrice Pembroke called 3 times. Her voice on the voicemail messages shifting from condescendingly sweet to furiously indignant. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I started to pack. For years, I had put off making any real decisions about my own future, assuming that somehow, things with Charlotte would get better. But I now realized I had been waiting for a train that was never going to arrive. Charlotte had chosen her life, and it was a life that had no real place for me, except as a resource to be exploited. It was time for me to choose a new life for myself. That afternoon, as I was carefully folding clothes into a suitcase, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Sarah from the sanctuary. Elaine, I don't mean to bother you, but I thought you should know we've had some interesting calls today. A solicitor called Harrison, from the Pembroke family firm, contacted our office this morning, demanding we halt all work on the property. When I explained that the donation was irrevocable, he became rather aggressive. I'm so sorry, Sarah. You shouldn't be dragged into this. Don't you apologize for a thing. Leo has already spoken to him and made it clear they don't have a legal leg to stand on. What did he say? Some very unprofessional things about incompetent old women and undue influence. Leo informed him that if he continued down that path, we would be happy to discuss his comments with the Law Society. For the first time in days, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Also, Sarah continued, her voice bright with excitement. I wanted you to know that the story in the paper has generated an incredible response. We've had over 50 calls from people wanting to volunteer, and 3 other significant donations have come in. Your generosity is inspiring others, Elaine. After I hung up, I continued packing with a lighter heart. I hadn't just protected my legacy, I had started something beautiful. On Sunday morning, I heard a car pull up. I peered through the net curtains and saw Rupert's sleek black BMW parked in my drive. Charlotte and Rupert were marching up my path, their faces a mixture of fury and grim determination. Trailing behind them, dressed as if for a garden party, was Beatrice Pembroke. They had come for the final showdown. But when they reached my front door and knocked, there was no answer, because I was already gone. An hour earlier, Talia had arrived to help me load my 2 modest suitcases into my car. We had hugged, and I had pressed a spare key into her hand. There are a few things in there I want you to have, I told her. The family photos, my mother's jewelry. It's all marked. Where will you go? She'd asked, her eyes full of a wisdom beyond her years. Somewhere I can just be Elaine, I had replied. Not someone's mother. Not someone's victim. Just me. As the Pembrokes hammered on my empty door, I was driving north on the M1, the window down, feeling a sense of freedom I hadn't known in decades. Tucked in my handbag was a small advert I'd cut from a magazine for a part-time job at a garden center in the Lake District. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start again. And for the first time in 40 years, that was exactly what I wanted to do. 6 months after I drove away from Sheffield, I woke in my small flat in Keswick to the sound of rain drumming against the slate roof and the scent of fresh coffee. The fells, shrouded in a soft morning mist, rose up like ancient, sleeping giants beyond my kitchen window. My new life was simple, but it was profoundly mine. I worked 4 days a week at the Lakeside Garden Center, a role that had quickly grown from a part-time job watering plants to helping customers choose the right roses for their clay soil or advising on the best way to deter slugs. It turned out that 40 years of nurturing a child translated surprisingly well to nurturing hydrangeas. The owners, a retired couple named Jim and Mary, valued my quiet patience with both the plants and the more demanding customers. My flat was modest. 1 bedroom, a small living area, and a tiny balcony where I was successfully growing a surprising amount of herbs. I'd furnished it with second-hand treasures from the local charity shops, pieces I'd sanded down and repainted myself, creating a home that was a true reflection of me. Here, in the quiet majesty of the Lake District, I had found a gentle anonymity. I was just Elaine, the quiet woman from the garden center. I wasn't the abandoned mother or the pitted woman from the wedding. I was a whole person valued for my own quiet worth. That particular morning, as I sipped my coffee, I received my weekly text from Talia. It was our little ritual. She would send me updates on her university life, and occasionally, carefully curated snippets of news about the family I had left behind. *Auntie, I have something special for you in the post. Should arrive tomorrow. Also, the Buster Sanctuary had its official opening last week. The photos are beautiful. I smiled as I replied, can't wait to see what it is. And please, send me the sanctuary pictures. The opening of the Buster Sanctuary had been a quiet joy I'd followed from afar. Sarah had sent regular updates, and the pictures had filled me with a deep, satisfying peace. The sanctuary was exactly as we had envisioned. Low, wooden buildings that blended into the rugged coastline, and secure, grassy paddocks where old dogs could potter about at their own pace. But the detail that had touched me most was that the sanctuary had already taken in 23 dogs in its first few months. Dogs with cloudy eyes and stiff joints, dogs who had been given up because they were no longer cute puppies, but who still had years of loyal companionship to offer. The next day, as promised, a parcel arrived from Talia. Inside was a beautiful, handcrafted wooden box. A note was tucked under the lid. *E. I found this in your old house when I was clearing out the things you left for me. It was at the very back of your wardrobe. I thought it was too special to be left behind. All my love, Talia. I opened the box. Inside lay my old diaries from when Charlotte was a baby, filled with my hopes and dreams for her. There were Arthur's love letters, and a stack of photographs from our early happy years. And at the very bottom, something I had completely forgotten existed. A letter from Arthur, written shortly before he died, sealed in an envelope that simply said, "For Elaine, for when you need to remember who you are." With trembling hands, I opened it. Arthur's familiar, strong handwriting filled my eyes with tears before I'd even read a word. My dearest Elaine, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've been carrying the world on your shoulders for far too long. I know your heart, my love. I know you will have given everything to our Charlotte, and likely forgotten that you deserve love and care too. I want you to remember a few things. First, you are the strongest woman I have ever known. Your gentleness is not weakness. It is chosen strength. Your silence is not passivity. It is wisdom, waiting for the right moment to speak. Second, if you ever feel you have lost your place in the world, remember that your value does not depend on how much others need you. You are valuable simply because you exist. And finally, promise me you won't spend the rest of your life living only for others. You have so much to give the world, Elaine. So much to discover about yourself. Don't let grief convince you that your story is over. I love you. Always. Your Arthur. I sat there in my little living room, clutching the letter to my chest, and I wept. Not tears of grief or humiliation, but tears of profound gratitude. For the love I had been given, for the strength I had found, and for the realization that my story was, indeed, far from over. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in nearly a year. I wrote a letter. Dearest Talia, thank you for sending Arthur's letter. It arrived at the perfect moment. I want you to know how much your friendship has meant to me these past months. Your refusal to accept the cruelty of our family reminded me that true bonds are not always of blood, but of shared values. I have made you my sole heir, not for the money, but because I want my values to live on in someone who understands them. As for Charlotte, I no longer feel bitterness. Only a deep sadness for the woman she chose to become, and for all she lost when she chose shallow ambition over real love. Arthur wrote that my story was far from over. He was right. I have found joy in simple things, in the growth of a plant, in the quiet beauty of the fells at dawn. I have discovered that happiness does not require an audience. Keep in touch, my dear. You are my chosen family, and that is more powerful than any connection of blood. With all my love, Auntie Elaine. As I sealed the envelope, a news alert pinged on my phone. It was from a national paper. Pembroke heir in shock divorce. Sources cite irreconcilable differences as socialite Charlotte Pembroke files for divorce from property tycoon Rupert Pembroke after less than a year of marriage. Friends of the couple hint at financial disagreements and a clash of values. I read the article, a brief, salacious piece filled with anonymous quotes about lavish spending and fiery arguments. It seemed the Pembroke empire wasn't as solid as it appeared, and without the promise of my Cornish land to bolster their finances, cracks had begun to show. I felt a flicker, not of triumph, but of a quiet, sad vindication. They had built their world on a foundation of greed, and it was crumbling, just as I had started to build a new one on a foundation of kindness. I put my phone down and looked out of the window at the darkening fells. My story wasn't about their downfall. It was about my ascent. And it was only just beginning.